Hello everyone and welcome to Am I Too Late? I am Naho, a late starter helping other late starters build financial and digital confidence. Over the last few episodes, we've been focusing on pensions, getting a bit clearer on how they work and what they're doing in the background. Pensions are powerful, but they're not the whole picture. For most of us, pensions work best alongside something a bit more flexible, and that's usually where ISAs come in. When I first heard about ISAs, I honestly thought they were just tax-free savings accounts with slightly better interest, and not really for me. At the time, my money was sitting in different savings accounts with decent interest rates, better than most ISAs. And I didn't feel like I had enough money for any of this to matter, so I didn't pay much attention. But as my savings grew, it reached a point where I needed to think about where that interest was landing. And that's when ISAs started to make sense to me, not as a clever move, just as a practical one. If this already feels a bit confusing, don't worry, we'll break it down properly as we go. Before we get into comparisons, I want to spend a bit more time just getting comfortable with ISAs themselves, what they are and what they're actually useful for. This episode isn't about allowances or limits. We'll cover those next time. Today is just about understanding. So let's take a step back and talk about why ISAs exist at all. At a basic level, an ISA is just a place to hold money where the interest you earn on it isn't taxed. ISA stands for Individual Savings Account. It sounds official, but it's simply a tax-free wrapper around your money. Beyond that, ISAs are also about flexibility. Unlike pensions, money in an ISA isn't locked away. You don't have to wait until a certain age or decide upfront exactly what it's for. It's simply money you can access if and when you need it. That's what makes ISAs particularly useful alongside pensions. They give you options. Once you see ISAs through that lens, as something flexible and reversible, they start to feel much more straightforward. Okay, let's start with cash ISAs. This might be something you have already heard of before. For a lot of people, and that used to include me, a cash ISA is just another savings account. You are told it's a good place to put cash, so you do. And then it just sits there. And that's fine, because cash has a very clear role. It's for safety. It's for stability. It's for knowing your money is there when you need it. So a cash ISA isn't something you need to overthink. It's a simple, flexible place for money to sit. But for me, once I started to understand ISAs more clearly, my next step wasn't to use cash differently. It was to look at a different type of ISA altogether. And that's where stocks and shares ISAs come in. So what is a stocks and shares ISA? If you've listened to the pension episodes, a lot of this will already sound familiar, because the underlying idea is the same. It's about investing, not saving. And if you haven't listened to those episodes yet, you can always go back. But I'll keep this simple. A stocks and shares ISA is just an ISA where the money inside is invested instead of sitting as cash. You're still using the same ISA structure. The difference is what the money is doing in the background. In practice, that often means investing through funds that spread your money across lots of companies. You can pick individual shares if you want to, but you don't have to. And you certainly don't need to be watching markets every day. This isn't day trading. It isn't constant buying and selling. And it doesn't require you to be an expert. What it does mean is that your balance will move up and down. That's normal. That's how investing works. Movement isn't the same thing as recklessness. A stocks and shares ISA is generally used for money you don't need right now. Money you're happy to leave invested and let grow over time. And just like with cash ISAs, choosing this doesn't say anything about your personality. It's just a different way of using money. One thing I really want to clear up here is that idea that using cash or investing says something about who you are. It doesn't. There aren't personality traits. They're just tools. A lot of the noise around money makes it sound like you need to be a certain type of person. Cautious, confident, brave, good with numbers, before you're allowed to use certain options. But that really isn't the case. What actually matters is understanding. Once you know what these tools are for and how they work, anyone can use them in a way that fits their life. You don't need a special mindset. You just need clarity. And that clarity changes things. You start thinking less about labels and more about purpose. What is the money for? When might you need it? How would you feel if its body moved around in the meantime? Those answers shift over time, and that's normal. You might use cash at one stage, investing at another, or both at the same time for different reasons. None of that needs to be permanent. This isn't about becoming a different kind of person. It's about knowing how that tools work and giving yourself permission to use them as your life changes. If there's one idea that runs through all of this, it's flexibility. That's really what ISAs are giving you. Options. They let you keep money accessible without forcing you to commit to a single version of the future. You don't have to decide everything up front. You can change your mind as life changes. That matters, especially if you're starting later, or rebuilding, or still figuring things out. An ISA can hold cash for now and investments later. It can be something you use actively or something that just sits quietly in the background. You can add to it, pause it, or use it without penalty or explanation. There's a lot of comfort in that. It means you don't have to get everything right straight away. You're not locking yourself into a path. You're giving future you choices. And for many people, that sense of optionality is just as valuable as returns. Before we wrap up, it's worth briefly mentioning a couple of other ISA types you might come across. One is the lifetime ISA. These were designed with very specific goals in mind, mainly first-time home buying or retirement. And they come with quite strict rules around when and how you can use the money. For some people, especially younger starters, they can make sense. But for many late starters, they're often not the best fit. The restrictions can feel limiting, and the penalties for accessing the money outside those rules can outweigh the benefits. So if you looked at lifetime ISAs before and thought this doesn't really feel right for me, that's okay. You're not missing out by skipping them. And just to say, if you are a parent, you might also be thinking about junior ISAs. That's a different conversation. This episode is about understanding ISAs for your own money first. The main thing here isn't to use every option available. It's to understand which tools suit your life. You might not have thought much about ISAs before now, or you might have assumed they were just another kind of savings account. That's very common. And it's also why this conversation matters. ISAs aren't something you need to obsess over, but they are worth understanding, especially if you're building things later in life and don't have decades to spare. This isn't about catching up overnight or making perfect decisions. It's about being a bit more intentional with the tools you're using. If this episode has simply made you more aware of what ISAs can do, that's enough for now. Understanding comes first, decisions can come later. Okay, let's wrap this one up. If there's one thing to take from today, it's this. ISAs aren't complicated status symbols. They are flexible tools. They give you access, they give you options, and they sit really well alongside pensions, especially if you're starting later or rebuilding. So here's your very simple mini homework. Check whether you already have an ISA. If you do, notice what type it is, cash or investing, and just ask yourself, Why did I open this? What is this money for? That's it. And if this episode cleared something for you or raised a question, come and tell me on Instagram at Am I Too Late Podcast. And if you've been listening quietly and finding this helpful, I just want to say thank you. I would really appreciate it if you could support the podcast by following me on Instagram. It genuinely makes a difference while I'm building this. And of course, make sure you're following the show as well, because next time we're getting into the real question, how pensions and ISAs fit together, and where your next pound might make the most sense. Thanks for listening, and remember, you are not too late. You're here now. That's what matters. See you next time. Here's the disclaimer. Everything I share here comes from personal experience and learning. This podcast is for information only and isn't financial advice. Please do your own research and talk to a professional financial advisor to find what's right for you.